Moving in on the top 10, slowly but surely on my fantasy playlist. Boy, got Joe Jackson coming up, and Hall & Oates, Christopher Cross, Lionel Richie. Can't wait to get to the song by ABC. Love ABC. They're in the top 10, but let's talk about Greg Kihn at number 11. His only top 10 hit, Jeopardy, up 5 from number 16 the previous week. Song Jeopardy didn't do as well in England, though. Not near as well in England. Went to number 63 in Britain. But it's a huge hit here in the States. Greg Kihn. The British invasion. Let's go back to 1964. God. If you're watching this video overseas, I can't even begin to tell you just how the British invasion was just cataclysmic. Culturally and musically. It changed everything almost. Well, not everything, but it changed a lot of things. Certainly turned a lot of heads, changed a lot of minds. When the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan that fateful night in 1964, millions watched, including a kid with a guitar with aspirations, Greg Kihn. The way Greg Kihn described it, he came home from school that Friday afternoon looking like Dion. That Monday morning after, he came back to school, his hair blow-dried and brushed, combed forward like the Beatles. Got rid of the Brill cream look. Everybody wanted to be like the Beatles. Look like the Beatles. Of course, you can only wear your hair so long back in 1964, believe me. This is the era still in the States of DuckTales and crew cuts. Of course, that will gradually change as the 60s wore on into the 70s. Greg Kihn, when he was a teenager, he started writing songs, playing in coffee houses. And he moved from Baltimore to San Francisco in 1972. And he worked a number of odd jobs. He was a painter, painting houses, singing in the streets. He worked in a record store, worked retail. The record store was called, this is a cool one, this was in Berkeley. It could only be in Berkeley. Rather Ripped Records. And another guy who worked there with him, Gary Phillips, future keyboard player of Greg Kihn, but formerly of the group called Earthquake. He was a group called Earthquake, which formed in Frisco back in 1966. Well, here's the bottom line. This is how Greg Kihn signed a deal with Berkeley Records. And around 1970, God, was it 72? It might have been later than that. It was sometime in the 70s. Released his first album in 1976. He covered, this is great, he covered He Will Break Your Heart, He Don't Love You Like I Love You. Tony Orlando and Don did a nice version of it, but I always go back to the original version of that song by Jerry Butler back in 1960, covered by the Greg Kihn Band, covered by Greg Kihn. Now, here's how the group, this is the group. The group members was Robbie Dunbar on guitar, Steve Wright, he was bass player, Larry Lynch on drums. Dunbar, he was in the group Earthquake. He was replaced by Dave Carpenter, officially replaced by Dave Carpenter on guitar by the time they got to their second album, Greg Kihn Band. They released every album. Let me rephrase that. It's getting late. It's 1:40 in the morning. They released, from 1976 on, they released an album every year. 1976, 77, 78, 79, Greg Kihn Band, they were releasing albums, released an album a year. Not commercial successes, not real big commercial successes. We're not talking about the same league as something like Led Zeppelin 4 or Houses of the Holy or Sgt. Pepper, but they did develop a cult following during these years. And they were undaunted. They didn't give up. They kept releasing albums. And by the time they got to their sixth album, it was called Rock and Roll. It had that it had that I-N-H in there, Rock and Roll. They came up with a breakup song. I don't like that anymore. Back in the summer of 1981, love that guitar. And then it was a killer record. But made it up to about 25 or 26 on Billboard's Hot 100. Then came Conspiracy, Jeopardy, Written by Steve Wright, group member Steve Wright and Greg Kihn. Big success story for the Greg Kihn Band. But a song that I get into by the Greg Kihn Band. Remember, it was Reunited with My Baby. Reunited, after all, I believe was how the lyrics went. It was a rocking record. Night Tracks played that back in the summer of 1984. One of my favorite Greg Kihn records, Reunited. Wonder if anybody remembers that one. Well, I'm sure a lot of people remember this one, Jeopardy by the Greg Kihn Band at number 11 on my fantasy playlist of March 18th, 1983.